This is a reply to Mr. Barron's video on what he thinks faith is and faith isn't. Basically, he's simply repeating an old Catholic stance. He starts by saying that people construe a distinction between naive faith and rational science, and that people often say that the Western mind has finally wiggled free of faith and moved into reason, that this is a good thing, and obviously he's opposed to that view. So he says this is a misunderstanding about what faith means, and interestingly, he doesn't say what he means faith, what he thinks faith is. Instead, he gives an analogy, which is the classical Catholic analogy. Heard it quite a few times. You get to know a person, you can determine quite a bit about the person by using your reason alone, but eventually you have to meet that person, and in your communication with that person, eventually something wonderful will happen in speaking with that person. That person will reveal something that you would not have known by reason alone. So you have to start to trust that person, and essentially this is the kind of faith that he means when he's talking about God. Even right here, there is a huge problem, which is that with an actually existing human person, the simplest reasonable hypothesis will be that this person exists. This is not the case with God, obviously. But apart from that, there is another, I think, even bigger problem. Namely, a lot of what we do in communication, which to Mr. Barron is the means of establishing that trust, is really a compression of experiences and of general rules that we have taken up along the way and that have helped us. So it is to a very large degree rational to rely on that kind of condensed experience. Like, for example, if a person does not obviously have a criminal past, then it's fair to assume that they are decent. If, on the other hand, a person has a criminal past and has been to jail, maybe it's grounds for not trusting them so much. You know, we actually, what happens in real communication acts is that we always vary our trust. We grade our trust. We adapt the level of trust that we are prepared to give to a person um, to the information we have about that person. And obviously, with God, you cannot do that. You can't have information about God. Okay? So, you cannot adapt your level of trust in any real manner with God. The other thing is that Mr. Barron presupposes that at that point we have already determined God's existence by reason and reason alone. He refers to Thomas Aquinas at that point, which I find astounding, to say the least. I find it astounding that this is obviously taught in Catholic theology. Okay, Thomas Aquinas as the rational basis for believing in God, because we all know, and you can easily look that up on Wikipedia, there are basically 6 proofs for God's existence. All 6 of these proofs have been debunked, completely and utterly destroyed. There is no value whatsoever to these 6 proofs of God. So the idea that there is a rational basis for the belief in God is ridiculous. And if the rational basis for the belief in God's mere existence I'm not talking about the Christian God here. Not yet. I'm simply talking about the existence of an absolute being without any attributes. If the rational basis for the belief in the existence of a being is not given, then of course putting your faith in character attributes of said being is ridiculous. The other point is, I think here it gets actually dangerous when you try to use the analogy with an actually existing person. Actually, there's two more points. One is, it is obvious that human beings have a need to put trust in other people. And exploiting that need for a religion is deeply immoral. It is extremely dangerous because you can use it for any religious idea. Doesn't matter which one. And the need for putting your trust in other persons is just a given. Religious teachers can count on this need, okay? But the other point is, since God does not actually answer because he doesn't exist, obviously, you cannot ever revoke that trust. The God hypothesis is unfalsifiable, obviously. So once you've started putting your faith and your trust in God, there is no way that you can ever revoke that faith, okay? Once you've started saying, God exists, I trust in God, I believe God helps me, you have no way of ever stopping to trust. And as I said, with real human persons, we always adapt our levels of trust. I believe almost everyone has made that experience. I certainly have made this experience. It's extremely sad, but it's just a fact of life. You put your trust in a person, and at some point you realize that this person has lied to you about something very important. And at that point you're faced with a decision. Do I still trust them? Or do I not trust them? And this decision essentially is a pretty rational thing. Okay, it's determined by factors such as does my financial well-being rely on that person and on the trustworthiness of that person. If that is not the case, then obviously it's easier to trust them. So, with actual existing persons, there is always a reason to revoke the trust. There is always a possibility to revoke the trust. With God, there isn't. So, I think these are essentially the points where the analogy totally breaks apart. And it has always broken apart, and it was always pretty obvious. And I find it really funny that obviously Catholic teaching and Catholic apologetics training, if there is such a thing, I believe there is in some way, still relies on these kinds of analogies. It actually displays a very severe lack of acknowledging the intelligence of other people, because it's so easy to look through. Those people who teach Catholic priests how to convince others must be completely oblivious to the fact that we others do actually think for ourselves. Maybe it's time to take that into account.